Good day, everyone. My name is James Go, and my medical entomology presentation is on the Japanese encephalitis, otherwise known as Japanese bee encephalitis or Nihon no en in Japanese. This picture is from a CNN news report about a Japanese encephalitis outbreak in India during 2011. This is the general information, aka the most important points you should get from this presentation. This is usually at the end, but fear not, because I will be repeating the slide for a second time to imprint it in your mind. Anyways, Japanese encephalitis is the main encephalitis in Asia and the Western Pacific. In case you didn't know, encephalitis is the inflammation of the brain. It is an arbovirus, meaning arthropod-borne virus, from mosquitoes, and the animal reservoirs are pigs and wild birds. The actual cause of the disease is a virus from the Flaviviridae family. Generally, you have a very low chance of developing encephalitis if infected, but in those who do develop the symptoms, 1 in 4 is fatal. It is more common in children, too. It is initially asymptomatic and only rarely will it be fatal. By fatal, I mean damage to the central nervous system, which may eventually lead to death. There is no specific treatment for Japanese encephalitis, but a vaccine does exist. More on this later. So first of all, a little bit of background history on Japanese encephalitis. Through genetic research, the virus was found to evolve from a very, very old virus from the Malay archipelago in Southeast Asia. The disease was called Japanese encephalitis due to the fact that the first clinical case was in Japan during the year 1871, and subsequent outbreaks occurred in the years shown in the slide. It took around 50 years after the first clinical case to isolate what they thought was the cause of the disease. In 1934, JEV, or Japanese encephalitis virus, was discovered, and around 4 years later, the role of Culex tritoneorhynchus as a vector was determined. In other countries such as Korea and the Philippines, the first case was around mid-19th century. The first vaccine was developed around the 1950s and has since been constantly researched to improve its performance. As you can see from the picture, the disease is basically found throughout most of Asia in primarily the eastern and southeastern parts. When you count the fact that China, India, and Indonesia are at risk, a little less than half the world's population at 3 billion people are at risk. The distribution is heavily dependent on the vector of the disease, which is the mosquitoes. The vectors of JEF are mosquitoes belonging to the genus Culex species. The taxonomy is on the top right of the slide. I'm not going to repeat it because, well, it's right there. The virus is spread through blood meals from two main species, Culex tritoneorhynchus and Culex vishnui. As you may or may not know, only the females are actually sucking the blood from animals for reproduction purposes, and they target large animals. Conveniently, us. They are primarily found in warm and humid, rural and agricultural areas. You know, where large livestock, or their food, I guess, are found. In temperate areas, they are found seasonally, particularly during the rainy seasons, whereas in the tropics, not surprisingly, they are found all year round. The virus responsible for Japanese encephalitis is from the family Flaviviridae, which is also known to cause yellow fever and West Nile encephalitis. The taxonomical conventions of viruses are different, unlike those of cellular organisms like us, and they start at order, which is conveniently unassigned for JEF, so they belong to group 4, meaning they have positively charged single-strand RNA. The virus is actually supposed to be transmitted to pigs and wild birds, but we get it because, well, the mosquitoes are terrible and evil people. Not people. Animals. Yeah. And the humans are actually a dead-end host because the amount of virus in the bloodstream is too low to infect other mosquitoes taking blood meals. This is the overall life cycle of JEF. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Basically, the definitive hosts are pigs and wild birds, as you can see from the top or bottom, and they are infected one way or the other, either by a vector or by other methods such as infected migratory birds, Then a mosquito will take a blood meal from the infected host and then become an intermediate host. The mosquitoes, which are carrying the viruses now, will then infect another possible definitive host. Lather, rinse, and repeat, and you have the whole cycle all over again. As previously mentioned, humans are a dead-end host, as they are not able to continue the cycle. So basically, we hate them, they hate us, but, well, they can't really hate, but you know what I mean. It's the mosquitoes, they suck. Symptoms and diagnosis of the disease. Again, most cases are asymptomatic or have non-specific symptoms, such as fever, nausea, etc. If there are symptoms, though, the incubation period is between 5 to 15 days, and they are separated into two different stages. The first is the acute stage, and it consists of neck rigidity, cachexia, otherwise known as wasting syndrome, which is basically loss of weight and appetite, hemiparesis, which is weakness on one side of the body, and convulsions. The second stage is damage to the central nervous system, or CNS, and like basically almost all other arbovirus that affect the CNS, the consequences can be fatal, such as coma, paralysis, and even death. Diagnosis in animals are relatively straightforward, such as finding out if your pig is infertile or if it had abortion, and neurological disease, such as in horses or pigs, and also fever, lethargy, and anorexia. In humans, however, one of the main diagnosis method is basically observing the symptoms, whether you have fever and whatnot, so it can be misleading at times. But there's also other diagnosis methods such as antigen and antibody examination and cell culture, but these are mainly used in lab work, not so much in practical medicine. Japanese encephalitis has no one specific treatment for the disease itself, aside from maybe hospitalization and supportive care. You can use medications to treat the symptoms, but not the virus itself. However, there is a vaccine. Yay! So, the type of vaccine they use is mainly killed and inactivated, which just means they use killed and inactivated viruses as the base. Even after more than 60 years, however, they are still doing clinical trials because there are still some unknown information regarding the vaccine itself. For example, how periodical should a person get boosters? But despite all these uncertainties, it is still highly recommended to get the vaccine, especially when traveling to endemic areas in Asia. Prevention and control. The main method of prevention is through vaccination and also education. You can technically vaccinate your pigs or your livestock, but people generally don't want that because most of the time you're going to end up eating it and, well, overexposure. Other methods include insect repellent, bed nets, insecticides, proper clothing, etc., etc., etc. It's on the slide. Bottom line is, avoid mosquitoes at all costs, or control their population using chemicals or biological methods or fly nets or something. And with that comes the end of my presentation. And here's the slide again for the review. I will quickly run down through the main points again verbatim from the slide, so bear with me. Japanese encephalitis is the main encephalitis in Asia and Western Pacific. It's an arbovirus from mosquitoes. Pigs and wild birds are reservoirs. It's generally low risk, but it's very common in children. It can range from asymptomatic all the way to fatal, and there are no specific treatment, but vaccines do exist. And we move to the references. These are the main references that I use for the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.